Okie dokie. So today we're going to be talking about additional damage procs, which are probably the least understood fucking mechanic in this entire game, especially evidenced by the response post to my last video claiming that Sunday E1 does buff Soul Dragon. I hate to disappoint you guys, it still doesn't. These guys are misunderstanding some things, and we're going to talk about how they're misunderstanding things, why Sunday E1 does not actually buff the dragon. That still hasn't changed from the last video. And then we're going to talk about in-depth how additional damage functions, how it gets its stats, how it claims ownership, how energy works when things get kills. And in doing so, we're also going to be discussing, for anyone curious, the quote-unquote bug between Hysilens and Cyrene, and with Dan, because there's a lot of people that still don't understand that, even though we already figured it out a long time ago. Pretty much immediately after she came out. But I guess that info never really got shared around after we figured it out, so we're going to talk about that today as well, because it does actually tie in to disproving this bullshit. First off, additional damage. It's not a follow-up attack, but it's also not a hit. Just to clarify the basics here. Additional damage is like an extra bonus instance of damage, separate from hits, separate from follow-up attacks, and it's also not dot damage either, nor is it break damage. In-game, the term that the game uses to define the attack type for additional damage is called pursued, as in chased. And for anyone curious, follow-up attacks are called insert, by the way. But additional damage, I don't necessarily blame you guys for misunderstanding, because it gets fucking complicated. The reason why it's probably the least understood mechanic in the game is because it's different every single time. You have things like Bailu's signature light cone, time waits for no one, which is a very, very different type of additional damage compared to the rest of the additional damage that you're used to seeing. We also have additional damage, and the spark of this fucking controversy, from Dan Hung on his preservation form, that works very similarly to Ting Yun, and maybe some of you are going to see where I'm going with this, but we'll explain. Because Ting Yun and Dan both give someone else additional damage, and to illustrate why I say they are giving it to someone else, we're going to talk about energy real quick, starting with Ting Yun. So Ting Yun, for anyone unfamiliar, her skill gives an ally target benediction, and then when an ally target has benediction, either after they attack or after Ting Yun does a basic attack, that ally will do an additional damage instance based on their own stats. If that sounds familiar, it's because Bondmate with Soul Dragon is phrased very similarly, in that Soul Dragon will do a follow-up attack, and then the Bondmate, or the ally with benediction in this case, does an additional damage proc based on their stat. And there are a lot of people that think that damage belongs to Soul Dragon, or they think that that damage in Ting Yun's kit belongs to Ting Yun. I am here to tell you, you are fucking wrong, and it's because you guys keep thinking this that people don't understand what's going on with Cyrene and Hysilens, but we'll get to that. But first, I want to clarify, and I want to drive home how ownership works, because additional damage is kind of like a gun and a bullet, is probably the best way to put this. Ting Yun, when she gives someone additional damage, she is literally handing them a gun, and then they load the bullet themselves and shoot it. So they are both the provider of the stats and the provider of the damage. It is literally their damage instance. Just because it was described in Ting Yun's kit doesn't mean it's actually her damage. And to illustrate that, we can show energy. Archer here has 140 energy before anything happens, but after Ting Yun does a basic attack, Archer is going to do a follow-up attack, which will almost kill the enemy, but then the additional damage will proc, and then it actually will kill the enemy. Okay, now here we see the actual additional damage proc and kill the enemy, and if you guys were right, if this were Ting Yun's damage, just borrowing the stats of Archer, which it's not, then Ting Yun would get the energy. Thankfully, we can show that that is wrong. After that death, Archer is now at 160 energy. Ting Yun's hasn't really changed. Archer was at 140 before. He gained 5 from the follow-up attack. He gained another 5 from Ting Yun's E2, which makes it so when the ally with benediction does some shit, they get another 5 energy. And then he got 10 energy for the kill, because 10 energy outside of pure fiction is the default amount of energy that you get from killing something. So that additional damage proc, even though it was a lightning proc, because a benediction forces the additional damage to be lightning, by the way, even though it was described in Ting Yun's kit, it is literally Archer's damage and Archer's source. And we can show this exact same thing with Dan and Soul Dragon. Before Archer takes a turn and then the enhanced Soul Dragon does a follow-up attack, we see that Archer is at 50 energy. But we can see that the quantum additional damage is proccing from Archer, and that manages to get 1 kill. Dan only gained a little bit of energy because as the bondmate, when a bondmate takes action, Dan gets a little bit of energy. Archer has moved up to 80 energy now. Since he's at 80 now, and he was at 50 before, He got 20 from his basic attack before Soul Dragon got a kill. And then Soul Dragon got a kill with the additional damage that you guys keep saying is Soul Dragon's, but then he got another 10 energy. Dan didn't get pissed. The reason why Archer is getting the energy is because it's Archer's fucking damage. And if this doesn't clarify it enough for you guys, let's talk about Hysilens and Cyrene. Let's explain that quirk real quick. For those unfamiliar with this, there's been a bit of drama about whether it's bugged or not and all this other shit, and people are misinterpreting the fuck out of Hysilens kit. But for those unaware, when Cyrene buffs Hysilens, people noticed that after Cyrene does her enhanced basic attack, that it's proccing the ultimate zone fish dot proc. And also, a lot of people are claiming that it's a detonation, by the way. It's not. You're fucking crazy wrong if you think it's a detonation. It's not triggering all the dots on a target, it's only triggering the dot from the ultimate zone. There's a very huge difference in what that actually does. But people noticed that Cyrene's enhanced basic attack after she buffed Hysilens was causing the ultimate zone dot to proc. And then later people realized that the additional damage from Dan, or any additional damage in that case, was also causing the fish dot to proc whenever the additional damage was sourced from Cyrene. And real quick, I've already looked. This was something we discussed quite a long time ago in the Discord. Hysilens code in particular, when it comes to her fish.proc handler, the event listener is looking for one of two things after she's been buffed in order to decide if it should cause that damage or not. The first thing it checks for is if an attack type was registered as dot. That should be obvious. It's obviously meant to proc after other dot instances go, not including itself. But the second thing that was added to her kit after Cyrene was added to the game is it also looks for any damage instance that is sourced by Cyrene. It doesn't matter what type it is. It doesn't matter what other tags are associated. It only cares that the source of the damage is Cyrene. So that's why when she does her enhanced basic attack after she's buffed her, because her enhanced basic attack is the only way she personally is going to be doing damage after that. That's why her enhanced basic attack instances are proccing the fish dot. And that's why with Dan and Soul Dragon, the additional damage after Soul Dragon's follow-up is proccing the fish dot, because the additional damage from Soul Dragon is Cyrene. It's not fucking Soul Dragon. It's not just borrowing the stats of Cyrene. Dan's code on the additional damage proc definition literally has two parameters on it. I can't even, trying to remember their names. Override attacker and override damage property source. If that doesn't fucking drive it home for you by this point, that the additional damage proc is in no way related to Soul Dragon, I don't know what to tell you. But for shits, we can show that after Ting Yun attacks, because right now Cyrene in this clip has Benediction, it's going to cause the fish dot proc. And you can see the fish dot proc popping up right there, because Benediction will do the additional damage when Ting Yun does her basic attack, or when the ally with Benediction attacks. And after Soul Dragon attacks, we do see that fish dot proc. Granted, it's being hidden by a gajillion true damage numbers, but the fish dot proc is happening. And again, it's because the additional damage is sourced from Cyrene. Not just borrowing stats from, it is entirely belonging to Cyrene. It's not Dan's damage at all. Inevitably, the next question that people have is going to be, then why does Sunday's E1 modify the additional damage proc? I'll assume for the sake of argument that you guys agree with me now that the additional damage proc isn't Soul Dragon's in any capacity, because you should understand that by now. So the question becomes, how does Sunday's E1 work if it's not Soul Dragon's action? Sunday's E1 looks for two things when damage is dealt. It looks for, well, assuming the damage is dealt by someone who has the E1 buff, but it looks for either damage that is tagged as summon. Not necessarily coming from a summon, but damage that is tagged as summon. Or it's looking for damage that is sourced from a memo sprite. The distinction here is that memo sprites are their own unique entities, but summons are their owners. And if you watched the last video, you already understand that entirely. The owners can deal their own damage, but owners can also deal their own damage that gets tagged as a summon. An example would be Topaz with her skill. That is obviously her damage, her instance of stats and all that shit, but it is tagged as a summon tagged instance of damage, and so it gets the benefit of summon damage bonuses. This works the exact same way. The additional damage proc on its definition literally has the tag assigned for summon damage. It does not, however, as this guy claims, benefit from follow-up attack damage. The follow-up attack from Soul Dragon itself does benefit from follow-up attack damage, like Robin's crit damage to follow-up attacks, but the additional damage proc, like he claims, does not. at all. Robin's handler, in particular, looks for insert attack types, and this isn't just me reading things, I've literally confirmed it in-game. It doesn't apply. It does count the additional damage proc as a summon tagged damage, but it does not count as a follow-up attack. And so Sunday's E1 gets to apply, because when the bondmate deals that additional damage instance as their own damage instance, it's still tagged as a summon instance, and because they are both the owner and the instance is tagged as summon, then that means they get the full 40%. But does the E1 ever touch Soul Dragon in any capacity? No, not unless Dan is the skill target. I say E1 doesn't fucking modify Soul Dragon because it doesn't. And I know a lot of people are gonna say, well, this is just pissing semantics, who fucking cares, because, people only care about the additional damage. But the distinction does matter. It's the same as people saying that fucking Cyrene proccing the fish dot is a detonation. Those are entirely fucking different things. And the ownership of the additional damage here matters immensely, because there are so many other things in the game that if we start saying that additional damage is Soul Dragons, it's gonna fuck over logic everywhere else. And I earnestly believe it's because we keep insisting that it's Soul Dragon when it's not, that people don't understand the Cyrene quirk with Hysilens yet. Hopefully, though, that has been cleared up in this video. Let's move on to how additional damage gets its bonuses. Most additional damage procs, I actually can't think of one that actually gets any other bonuses besides Dan. Another common misconception people have is that additional damage procs will inherit the damage bonuses native to the action that caused them. So let's say that Tribby, people are familiar with Tribby, she's a really easy example. When her ultimate zone is up, it looks for ally attacks, right? And then it causes multiple additional damage procs afterwards based on how many enemies were in that attack, to the enemy with the highest current HP. There's a lot of people out there that think that if a skill was what was used to cause the attack, and then Tribby's additional damage came afterwards, there's a lot of people that think that skill damage bonuses would apply to the additional damage. It does not. Additional damage, in pretty much every single case, only benefits from all damage percent or from elemental damage percent that matches the type of the additional damage. So wind additional damage would benefit from wind percent damage bonuses. An exception to this is time waits for no one. This is Bailu's signature light cone, and I know no one gives a fuck about it, and justifiably so. This one is still additional damage. It follows the pursued attack type, but it is following what is called a pure damage formula in the game, meaning that it can't benefit from any damage bonuses, period. It'll still get modified by like defense shred when you're dealing the damage, or res pen, that kind of shit, but in terms of any damage percent bonuses that could apply to this, they never will. The bondmate's additional damage from Dan is unique because that one still benefits only from all damage percent or elemental damage percent that matches the type of the bondmate, but the difference here, as we just discussed, is this additional damage proc definition has the summon tag attached to it. But pretty much all additional damage instances in the game, though they're all a little different in how they apply, pretty much all of them only ever benefit from those two bonuses in particular, including Hysilens Light Cone, which is why it's so particularly nice, because little Ica gets like 300% damage bonus as all damage in his own kit just for healing people, and the additional damage proc on Hysilens Light Cone is considered to be Ica. So his gigantic fucking damage bonus applies to his additional damage proc. Another really common misunderstanding that people threw in my face a lot was on HomDGCat. They really liked to fucking quote him because his note here says Soul Dragon is considered Bondmate's summon, but in Soul Dragon's turn, first Dan Hung, not Bondmate, launches a follow-up attack, then Bondmate deals additional damage, quote-unquote, considered as damage dealt by Bondmate's summon. I personally think this is phrased horribly because he's either wrong or it's phrased fucking awfully. Or you guys are misunderstanding it and he meant it this way intentionally. I don't fucking know. But this does not mean that it's additional damage considered as Soul Dragon's. It's meaning that the additional damage is considered a summon tagged instance from the bondmate. Now, it's up to interpretation whether he actually meant that, but anyone who has tried to interpret this, that the additional damage is Soul Dragon's, is wrong. But in summary, it's not just semantics. Sunday E1 does not apply to Soul Dragon in any capacity, not even a little. Unless, again, Dan is the fucking target. And then additional damage, I hope the ownership discussion, how we talked about how it modifies Cyrene is the owner of the additional damage in cases like Ting Yun or Dan here, and the energy gain examples, because that is extremely important if you're trying to optimize your teams, especially in zero cycle scenarios. That this isn't already explicitly common knowledge kind of blows my mind. I don't expect the average player to figure this shit out, but And then in closing, I did have quite a few people that were upset in the last video that I bagged on some of your favorite content creators for not testing for piss. And I would like to let you know that you are cordially invited to suck my ass